Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and my guest today is Dr. Travis Weiland, who did this work that we're going to talk about at the University of Houston. But Travis, I hear that you've got a move coming up this summer if you want to announce some news here.
Yeah, going to be moving to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte this summer, so super excited about that.
Yeah, congratulations very much on that move. And I know you have a lot of North Carolina connections, so that's probably pretty exciting.
Yes, very much so. I do a lot of work there, so it'll be nice to be back in the state.
Well, thanks for coming on. We're going to talk about a new chapter that Travis has published along with Chris Engledowl, friend of ours, Mizzou grad here, and also Susan Cannon. And the three of you have a chapter in the new AMTE Handbook of Mathematics Teacher Education. And that handbook is edited by Babette Benkin. But your chapter is called Preparing Teachers of Statistics, a critical read of standards, review of past research, and future directions. And so, Travis, this handbook chapter focuses on preparing teachers to teach statistics, but of course it's rooted in the general importance of statistics education for students, like in general. And I know this is a big passion area of yours, just stats education overall. So first of all, maybe talk to us about what's motivated you to want to promote stats education, to be kind of a champion for stats education, and to have it be in the school curriculum, not just something that like you wait till college to get stats. It's like, no, stats has a role to play even in the school grade levels. So what's motivated you in that general arena?
I started out in education as a high school mathematics teacher, and some of the courses that I taught were integrated, and so they involved statistics curriculum. And I had never taken a single stats course in my pre-service teacher education myself. I did the typical thing of I was a mathematics major, and then, it was kind of like a dual major with secondary education. What I noticed was that when I started taking my master's courses, I took some actual statistics courses. And what that made me realize was that I actually really didn't know what stats was or how to teach it well. And so that kind of sparked this interest for me in looking at, is that just an issue that I was facing, or is this a broader issue? And pretty quickly found that it's a broad issue that we face, and not only in the U.S., but honestly, I work with a lot of international folks, and every country faces this. I have not met one person from a country that's like, we've got it figured out. So that really sparked my interest. And, I was lucky enough that I had mathematics educators as some of the faculty there that said, if this is something you're really passionate about, you should go get a PhD so then you can study this thing. And so that's kind of what I did. And it's what I spend most of my time thinking about now. And I think the pandemic in particular has just kind of further motivated me down this road of thinking about how do we really create a system of education that prepares citizens to engage in the types of kind of data-based discourse that is so prevalent today.
Mm-hmm. And I know, too, you talk in the chapter about the relevance of statistics knowledge and how it's really rearing its head in a lot of ways across democracies, across information sharing, across social media. And so do you also find that statistics just has more impetus for like, we need to be working with students on this versus maybe some other small parts of algebra or some specific theorems in geometry or something? So how does that feel, sort of pushing stats in the world that we live in right now?
Yeah, so it's a weird space right now in a number of different ways. And that's partially because, data science has just exploded, especially in the business realm, in the workplace. And we see it in higher ed quite a bit, with universities now having schools of data science, or it's a degree program in some college. They're in all different colleges and different universities. And that has really started to trickle down into the K-12 environment. And that's kind of intertwined with stats ed that's been around for a couple decades. And then you have the pandemic that really motivated a lot of folks to say, oh, data is something we need to look at, but we need to go beyond what the math curriculum has done historically, which was often very much rooted in the work of John Tukey, who was a famous statistician in the 70s. So that kind of dates some of those ideas. And we haven't changed that curriculum much, right? Like the math curriculum still very algebra driven, very functions driven, and the stats has kind of been sprinkled in as, hey, there's another way you can graph things that you don't have to just use a scatter plot, right?
Yeah. Measures of center. Hey, let's talk about measures of center several different times.
and for the most part, it's focused on the calculation of those things too. Like, let's calculate the mean of this, completely decontextualized set of numbers. And so there's all sorts of complexities and issues that are kind of wrapped into that we see in the educational system in general, with then statistics is a different discipline than mathematics, but it's in the mathematics curriculum. But math teachers typically aren't prepared to teach statistics or even take statistics courses. And then you get into the whole realm of, nowadays with No Child Left Behind, testing drives so much of what gets taught. Most states don't include many items in their assessments that are focused on statistics.
Hmm.
The Common Core even stripped all the statistics out of the elementary kind of K-5 curriculum. And so it's a really strange space in that when you talk to somebody and say, I try to prepare teachers to teach statistics and data science, they're like, wow, that seems really important. And yet it's very rarely actually done
Hmm.
in classrooms because of so many of these kind of systemic issues that we have in educational systems here. So it's a really complex space to kind of work in. That's also what makes it really fun in some ways too.
Yeah. And it does seem like, kind of on the leading edge of how are we going to make the changes to get it in the curriculum? How are we going to assess it? How are we going to put it on an even level with algebra and with other important topics? I mean, I'm not an expert in stats education, but I see the value in it. And I think we probably do need more of it. And we probably need to reduce some of the, algebra standards and geometry standards, like fewer standards overall, but some of them should be stats standards and it should be at multiple grade levels. But you alluded to it here about also preparing the teachers and how do the teachers feel about teaching statistics? Are we relying on math teachers to do that? In the chapter, you talk about teachers of statistics to keep it broad, where it's like these might be various different people coming from different angles who are teaching statistics things. But with regard to preparing teachers of statistics, in the chapter, you look at policy, you look at research, you give some recommendations for what we need to do in the future. Let's start with the policy thing. What are some of the current policy guidelines and how do those align or maybe not with the current realities that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so there's a few kind of predominant policy guidelines that talk about like what should be the statistical preparation of mathematics teachers. So some of that is in the MET 2. Now the MET 2 now is pretty dated. I know they're working on a MET 3 currently. And then more recently, what they wrote was what's called the SET document, which riffs off the MET document of being the statistical education of teachers. And that came out I want to say 2010, 2015, somewhere in there. And that was building off the GACE framework, and that comes from the American Statistical Association, but is also endorsed by NCTM. Those recommendations, a lot of it's around what's the content and what's the pedagogy preparation that teachers need. And those recommendations are based on grade bands. So for the most part, if you're an elementary teacher, you should probably take like a methods-ish course on content related to that statistics instruction. In the middle grades, you should take like a content stats course and a methods course. And then at high school, you should have at least two content courses and a methods course are generally what those recommendations are. In reality, very few teacher preparation programs do that, particularly the requirements at the high school level of having at least two content courses and a methods course. Most people I talk to, they've seen maybe a content course and a unit in a methods course that was on that. I know currently there's a project out of NC State that's working on trying to do a national survey to get a better sense of what the state of the field is on that right now. But anecdotally from the conversations I've had with folks, it's just we're not seeing that. And these documents are now fairly dated if you think about it. So the set is at least a decade old. MET 2, I think, I almost want to say 2 decades old. It's pretty old at this point. And like I was saying, with data science coming online now in so many states, we're grappling to catch up with where we should have been 10 years ago, let alone where things are moving to now. And you've worked in education a long time. It changes very slowly.
Hmm. If at all, yeah.
Yes, if at all.
Yeah. But then there's the research side of things. You're a researcher, and with Chris and Susan, you were looking at what articles have been published that focus on statistics and especially, teachers of statistics. So how's the research field doing? I've read it, so I kind of know the answer, but I still let you talk to us about it. How about the research domain? Also not known for its speed and rapidity.
No. Those stats ed moves a little faster than math ed.
Yeah, I kind of am noticing that. Yeah, stats ed sometimes like, let's get this, let's do this.
Yeah, it's interesting. So to kind of step back for a second and give you some context, what we did was a systematic literature review to try to really parse out like what is out there in this realm around the preparation of K-12 stats teachers. And we looked from 2011, which was the year another kind of compendium book came out that was very focused on that. So we wanted to basically look at where has it come since then. And we did it over a decade because when we initially did this search, it was in 2021. And what we found was that, the vast majority of the articles come out of two journals, which is rather unsurprising because they are the top two statistics education journals. So one is the Statistics Education Research Journal, which is published by the International Association of Statistics Education. And they accounted for 12 of those publications, which I think we had 45 total. So a pretty sizable chunk. And then the other journal was the Journal of Statistics Education, which has actually recently been renamed the Journal of Statistics and Data Science Education to reflect those big shifts in the field. And that accounted for another 7. And then there's kind of just a smattering of others in other journals that are math ed associated. Interestingly enough, nothing in JRME and only one in ESM. So those top tier journals not really publishing much in the genre of statistics teacher education. And then we wanted to dig deeper, and this is a handbook published by AMTE that has their own standards for the preparation of mathematics teachers. So we wanted to look at, okay, based on those standards, how could we maybe kind of organize or sort these publications to get a sense of what elements of these standards they were addressing. And what we found was basically everything was related to either content preparation of teachers or pedagogy. And there's two other standards of practice that they talk about in AMTE standards, and that's thinking about students as learners of mathematics, which we didn't find present in any articles. And then the other one is kind of more of the socio-political lens on the social and historical contextual factors of teacher education. And again, we found nothing in that genre. And so kind of some pretty huge gaping holes, so to speak, on understanding how we prepare those teachers. And, something else we pointed to in this article was that at the time that we were initially started working on this, data science was like a thing that you were hearing about in California because like it was going to be in the new California frameworks, which that's a whole nother thing. Like the whole math wars have been resparked over that now. And that's its whole own like thing. But, one of the things we wanted to start to look at was, if California starts to do this, other states will probably start to look towards it. Do we know anything even about preparing teachers to teach data science? And we found nothing. We included that in our search terms because we wanted to be somewhat forward thinking in what we were looking for, and just nothing there. And so it's interesting to see now that we have so many states that are starting to do data science curriculum, and yet we know basically nothing about actually how to prepare teachers to teach that curriculum. So it's wide open space.
Right. So we have, as teacher educators, we would have these general principles of teacher education. We would have these theories that sort of could be applied across subject areas, across topics, and, those would hopefully help inform us. But what you're getting at is research that is specifically on the teaching of statistics or data science as its own topic that might have its own nuances. It might actually have different pathways to conceptual development than like, abstract mathematical kinds of concepts or theorems, might be more based on simulation, based on real data. Like how are those, how does a teacher know to bring in those connections? Is it the same as they do with math connections, or is it a different kind of thing? I feel like there probably would be differences, like some important differences possibly, but maybe we just don't have the literature base yet. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that, about like the general notions of teacher education, but also some specific nuances that might be yet unknown within teaching stats, preparing to teach stats?
There's actually a body of literature around what the differences are between the two disciplines and how that translates to nuances in how you would teach it. And so one, for example, that I've thought about a number of times was, when I was coming through my doctoral program, I learned a lot about realistic mathematics education, right? And this idea kind of coming out of the Europe space of, it doesn't necessarily need to be a real situation necessarily so much as one that a child could imagine themselves within, therefore making it real. Statistics, it doesn't translate to as well because everything that you do in statistics is with data, and data are all numbers in context. And so the idea of completely fictionalizing the statistics sometimes loses some of the nuances of the fact that context matters for everything that you're doing. And I don't think it completely negates it. Like there are certainly examples I've seen, Paul Cobb and Rich Lear did a fair bit of work where they kind of created some scenarios that they did cognitive interviews with students and were able to learn a lot about how they think about modeling and variability and those types of ideas. But as we're aiming more towards the future, and we really want students to make sense of real data sets and do more than just kind of the basic modeling at the elementary levels, we really need to have them engaged in real data. And that's super messy, which means you bring in all these other ideas around what technology that you have to use, how do you structure a data set, what's the organization, how did you measure these things? It's a lot more like what you do as a quantitative researcher skill wise than it is what we typically teach as statistics in the K-12 environment. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of new theories that are starting to crop up about that. I mean, one that I've seen recently was this idea of instead of providing students with clean data, which is typically what you see in a textbook, provide them with tamed data. So the idea is that knowing what your learning objectives are, tame the data enough so that the students can actually do something with it. It's not too unwieldy, but they still have to do some organizational things, some restructuring with it to get it to the point where they can actually do the analysis, because that's part of your learning objectives now is that idea of like, how do you start to learn how to structure the data? And so I think we're seeing as more and more folks are exploring this space, we're seeing that there are different nuances to how you have to think about teaching statistics
Yeah.
are in mathematics education.
Yeah, and any choice to clean in some way or to simplify in some way, having that conversation about what's lost. Is it okay to lose that right now? Will it be worth it because it'll still keep the core of what we're trying to do? Like those conversations are actually maybe the thing you want to do with the students. You maybe want the students to help realize, oh, if we simplify the data in this way, we're actually going to lose something important. We better not do that. That's a good conversation versus no, we can simplify it in that way. It's not going to affect the core question that we're asking or something. We'll still be able to answer that from what we have left. That's also maybe a good conversation to have. But as you're talking, though, it's just making me think that it is a different set of skills and teacher knowledge than even a great mathematics teacher. Like you could have a teacher that's like, I know all these learning trajectories through algebra content. I know geometry. I know how to integrate algebra and geometry. I know how to build those concepts, find problems, bring them to life. That teacher, even if they are stellar in these mathematics topics, might not have the first idea about where to find the data set. What does a tame data set mean versus a clean data set versus a messy one? And then how do you follow or how do you lead a student through concept development in stats? I feel like that could be a whole new ball game for that teacher, even an excellent math teacher.
Oh yeah, completely. And some of the best stats teachers I've run into are often career changers I've found. So they did something more data analytically focused as their first career and then moved into teaching because there's a lot of enculturation that we get as mathematics teachers, right? Like specifically high school teachers that I work with a lot. You usually get a full-on bachelor's in mathematics. And so you're very much kind of enculturated into thinking about very deductive kind of logic in a lot of the things that you're doing. Very kind of, it's okay to just completely operate in an abstract realm for a period of time. And even when I talk to a lot of people that become math teachers and I ask them, like, what is it about teaching math that you're really excited about? Often what they go back to is their experiences learning mathematics. And that's what they want to replicate, right? And so they're thinking again, very much like, I want to do a lot of algebra problems, right? Like I want to do the quadratic formula and factoring a lot, things like that, which don't really relate at all to anything in the statistics curriculum or how you'd think about it. And in fact, a common thing I hear from them too is that they don't like the statistics because they like math because there's one right answer and they don't have to write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And stats is like the complete opposite, right? Like
Yeah.
we deal with nothing but uncertainty and all we're doing is writing persuasive arguments with data. And so there's these interesting little like enculturational issues that you kind of run into in doing the teacher preparation. And some of those come out in some of the articles that we were reading, but a lot of what we were seeing more of was just struggles with even just getting content taught to teachers. And I'm talking like the basic content. And part of that is just, again, it's not really a deficit view of teachers. It's just that they weren't prepared to do that, right? Like we're asking them to do a very different thing. And so I think more and more as we're thinking about things, we have to think about what are math teachers really good at and how do we leverage those assets? Like you said, even the best math teacher might not be a great stats teacher, but how do we take what makes them a really good math teacher and then leverage that to then build on making them a really good stats teacher? And I think that's part of what we have to do because we have, millions of teachers in the field that are going to need some of this preparation
Yeah.
as content keeps moving forward.
Yep, I agree. And yeah, just to clarify my point, it's just that they wouldn't automatically, like at the snap of a finger, be a great stats
Oh,
teacher,
yeah.
but they could get there. They could get there. They could build on what they have, known the students and yeah, and go. But just, yeah, I was trying to point out, like, it's just that there are differences that kind of have to be acknowledged. And research could hopefully contribute to that. With thinking forward with the research in the chapter, you lay out some calls for like, we need to get some more understanding of this and this. You lay out some questions that need to be pursued. So maybe you can just mention a few of those here of some recommendations that you're making for research efforts.
Yeah, yeah. So part of what we tried to do is again tie this back to AMTE standards, and use that as kind of a driving force. So of course, those two standards around, students as learners of mathematics and kind of really focusing in on the social, historical, and cultural dimensions of mathematics education. We have no work really around those things. Now, I think more recently after we wrote this, some things have started to come out, so that's promising to see. But we have a huge space to fill there. And then, some of the other things that we started looking into were some of the more research specific kind of questions. Like we don't have many frameworks to draw upon. I often tell people that stats education as a field is typically 20 to 30 years behind mathematics education. So we still struggle with seeing theories of learning used coherently sometimes in some of the work because some of it's done by statisticians, right, that don't have educational research backgrounds. And so they're not necessarily drawing on those educational theories and the work that they're doing. We don't have really any measures. I think we have like maybe two in all of stats ed. So we need more measures that have some validity and reliability evidence too.
And you're talking about like school level stats, right? Because I feel like there is stuff that's like university stats.
There is more at that level.
Yeah, but
Certainly.
you're really thinking about the school kids. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have much in terms of like what's a good way to measure their statistical understandings. We have some very basic tools, but we're missing a lot of things and not much of it, even though we focus heavily on practices, like teaching statistics as an investigative approach. We don't really have any assessments that really assess students' abilities to engage in that practice, right? Most of them are still very much like, can they interpret a box plot kind of types of assessment questions?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's a huge space to have to fill because if your assessments don't match what you're trying to do, then there's, you have a measurement issue right there. I mean, from a research perspective. So even just scaling things up and trying to convince policymakers, we need more tools that are measurement tools to try to show some of that stuff at scale. We still don't have a lot of theories of learning that are specific to statistics learning. Even like MKT, that idea, Randall Groth translated that kind of to the statistical framing about 10 years ago, but we still don't see much work that really builds off that per se or starts to unpack the nuances. No measure was ever created related to that. We still are grappling with the pedagogical side to some extent too. And even more so, I think an area that we're completely lacking is kind of like, what's the TPAC associated with teaching statistics? Because we still predominantly are seeing stats taught with TI-84s, which, is not the tool that statisticians use to do their work.
It's not? Oh, they're using the TI-86 probably, right?
I think they're maybe on the Inspire now, maybe. Yeah, and so that's another whole side of things. Like we spent a lot of time actually too of just not only teaching teachers content, but teaching them how to use spreadsheets in ways that statisticians do, or, most of them haven't been prepared to do data structuring themselves. And so we have very little research on like what of that information do teachers need to know to do this thing well.
I still feel like spreadsheets themselves are still this really huge untapped resource for like school math and school stats. It's like it can do so much, and it's something that is used a lot in life, but it also can really be used to delve into some pretty cool concepts and patterns and stuff. But yeah, I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but like even just spreadsheets themselves can do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I taught at community college level, all the stats courses were based in spreadsheets because it was something that would prepare them for whatever degree they went into, whatever field. And most people have access to a spreadsheet program. If they have Office on their computer or they have Google, they can use a spreadsheet versus, a lot of these other, more advanced statistical software like
Yeah,
SPSS.
they seem more intimidating to get started, kind of thing.
Well, and they cost a ridiculous sum of money, a lot of them too. And so, it's just people aren't going to pay for that. They're not going to be able to use it in the same way. So, training folks to use tools that are actually openly available is something that's really important. Which, going back to the TI-84, how many people walk around with a TI-84, right?
Hmm.
Why aren't we teaching them how to at least use their cell phone? I mean, that's at least a tool everybody walks around with that would actually be useful in your daily life to do some of these things. And I mean, you can't really do a spreadsheet grade on a cell phone, but there's more and more apps out there to do statistical type things on actual platforms that people use on a daily basis. I think part of what we need to do is move towards that and think about how do we prepare teachers to teach with those things too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I could talk to you a lot more about it, but it seems like there's quite a bit of work to do in this area. So I wanted to finish up this kind of substantive conversation by just asking you what you are working on right now in your research. Which part of this whole realm of work are you biting off to try to chew on right now?
I think two projects that are eating up most of my time right now in good ways. One of them is a 5-year project where we're trying to look longitudinally at a group of teachers' development and teaching data investigations through exploring relevant sociopolitical issues. And
Mm,
it's a small group of teachers, but what we're really trying to do is dig into some of these nuances of how are they developing over time with these ideas. So getting at some of what I talked about of like, we don't really even know that well how to prepare teachers or what they need to know for some of these things. So that's part of what we're trying to delve into is start to make sense of, okay, with this group of, 20 some teachers, if we work with them and follow them over the next 3 to 4 years, what can we realistically do with them? Like, how do we figure out what their assets are, leverage those, and then start to move towards kind of this ideal goal of what we want? And how do we get there? And what is it that we did actually seem to be useful in getting there, and what maybe wasn't, so that we can try to translate that. And the other side of that, what I've been trying to do is knowing how much work this takes and how much background knowledge people need. I'm more and more convinced that there's no way for us to really do this effectively through pre-service teacher education because our curriculum's already so bloated with content. There's just not space. I mean, that's why most programs haven't included more stats is just logistically speaking, they just can't figure out where to stick it, right? Like
hmm.
most states have all sorts of accreditation standards of what kind of courses they need. Math departments are hesitant to let go of math courses. And so you end up in this space where, even if there's a strong desire by a group of faculty to renovate their program to include more stats content, there's just not anywhere to fit it into the schedule. And so what I've leaned into now is more thinking about how do we develop maybe a master's program that does this instead? So thinking about what if we had, let's say we got 36 credit hours worth of stuff we get to do with this group of teachers. What would we put in there?
Hmm.
So part of that, I think, is getting more at trying to pull from this kind of growing body of literature, but then also talking to a lot of experts that are in the field doing this work right now. Like if you're a teacher teaching statistics or teaching data science, how did you learn how to do what you're doing?
Yeah, there are teachers that are leading the way probably more where they've figured out how to do it well and they're actually ahead of the research community probably in some ways.
Oh, very much so. Or even state leaders, because some of these states like Oregon, Virginia, California, where they're starting to really like widespread have data science courses, they're having to train their teachers. And so they're just having to try to figure this out on the fly. So how do we pull that expertise together and try to frame out what a 36-hour master's program would look like and then put that into action in a way that we start to create something more sustainable and systemic, right? Because I can run around and do 1 hour, 1 week even PDs until I pass out, but that's still going to hit so few teachers. And we just know from the teacher ed literature that those don't do that much, right? Like there's not a lot of lasting impact of those one-off PDs. And there's so much content for folks to engage with and so many different ways of thinking that it really needs to be given more time and more space to be done. And so the only way that I've discovered that I think we can do that is maybe through a master's program. Because otherwise, too, the other issue is where does the money come from to do this, right? Like PD either costs districts, which a lot of districts have cut that funding, or it costs grant dollars, and grant dollars run out. And then what do you do? It like disappears into the ether, right? And so
Hmm.
how do you start to build things into more lasting structures to really help have systematic change to prepare teachers to do these things?
Hopefully the districts, or at least some districts, would help pay for master's degrees to have teachers on their staff who get this statistics knowledge and statistics ed training. It does also seem like, though, that in the past, school districts had more money to sponsor graduate credit, or we'll pay half the grad credit. If you get a master's, we'll pay half, you pay half. But it seems like that has reduced, at least in the Midwest and stuff where I'm working, where a lot of districts don't offer that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah, and even in the Southeast, where I've spent a lot of my time, more and more states have pulled away from even offering increased salaries if you have a master's. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, that's become a real dilemma. Actually, one of the things that keeps me up at night sometimes thinking about this approach is that if you have enough content credit hours, you can go teach at a community college or a small liberal arts college, most likely. So does giving them this preparation mean that they leave the teaching workforce
Yeah.
to go somewhere else and teach that might be better pay and less stress? I don't know. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's another issue for another day, I guess.
Yeah, it's tough, but well, as you've laid out though, a lot of important things that we need to keep talking about, and hopefully, a group of people, there is a group of people that it's forming. It does seem like Stats Ed is starting to be a more vibrant community, adding members all the time. I think this chapter will hopefully help call people into the fold to sort of work on this effort. So again, I'm speaking with Travis Weiland, who's now going to be at UNC-Charlotte, but Chris Engledowl, Susan Cannon also co-authored this chapter. It's the chapter Preparing Teachers of Statistics. And again, it's in the new AMTE, Association of Math Teacher Educators, Handbook of Math Teacher Education. This is the one that's Reflection on Past, Present, and Future, Paving the Way for the Future of Mathematics Teacher Education, Volume 5. So check that out from AMTE. A lot of fun talking to you about it, but I think we could have even more fun with my final question. Well, actually, two quick ones. First of all, where did you get your PhD and who was your advisor? I'd like to put everybody on the map if I can.
Oh yeah, University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. I had three different advisors over my time period there.
Oh, interesting.
Bad reasons for good reasons. Like just learned a lot of different things. My advisor when I graduated was actually a science educator, Dr. Shaknosa Kayumova, who studies a lot around kids' scientific identity development and work with multilingual learners.
Okay, great. But if you hadn't gone into math ed, stats ed at all, is there something you could imagine as an alternative career for yourself?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at a work college. So think like if John Dewey invented a college, that's where I did my undergrad work.
Hmm.
And the work that I did for the college was electrical work. And so I used to moonlight to, make extra money with that. And I distinctly remember right before I started teaching, working on a construction site, and the crew asked me, they're like, "Oh, we heard you're only around for a short period of time. You're going into teaching." And they just started laughing, and they're like, "All of us were teachers. We left and we're much happier and we drink a lot less now." So honestly, I think that would be the career. Like if teaching hadn't hooked me the way that it did, I would probably do electrical work. The sad thing I joke with people sometimes is, and I'd probably make more money doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I'm a big fan of the trades. I encourage my students, I've had a number of students over the year that were like, everybody tells me I have to go get a bachelor's degree, but I just want to do construction. I want to go do plumbing or something like that. And I'm like, you should totally do that
Hmm.
because you'll make more money and you might be, from the people I've talked to, you might be happier in the long.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've always thought about that. There's a lot of problem solving in electrical work, similar things that get you excited.
Right. And I think there is also like a conceptual understanding level and then also like a practical, algorithmic kind of level. So there's some stuff that's like, yep, I know how to do this particular skill, but there's also this conceptual understanding of what is the actual electrical grid for this house? Where are the circuits? How does it link up to the grid? I appreciate electricians when they have that really good insight of, wow, they not only know how to do the little nuts and bolts, they actually know how all of it is working and why it works, and all that stuff is also a nice blend of the conceptual with the procedural.
Well, that's a really nice math application too. When you think about most of our current system is AC, which is a really nice way to think about sinusoidal functions, right? We only have so many real examples that we commonly pull in with that, and one of them is your AC current. It's a nice little sine wave.
Yep. Yep. And you could talk about what the amplitudes and all this stuff might mean for electrical current and stuff. But no, that's great. Well, it's been good talking to you, Travis. I really appreciate your work and definitely wish all the best. Like I said, I'm not in stats education, but I'm happy to be a cheerleader from the side. And if I can be helpful in some way, I do think it's a place that we need to go, both for curriculum, policy, and teacher education. So thanks for all your work on it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to chat with you about it today.